Hello everyone, I'm here. And today, we are going to look into what is possibly England's most haunted house. The story I am about to tell you comes from Borley Rectory in Essex, and has to be one of the scariest stories I have ever heard. Let's get into it. The story begins in 1862 when Reverend Henry Digby moved into the rectory with his wife and 7 children. The family had only been living there a couple of months when strange things started to happen. In October of that year, Mrs. Digby was sweeping the drawing room when she heard the distinct sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. She was too concerned by this because her husband and one of her sons were in fact in the room above where the footsteps were coming from. However, the footsteps continued even after the men had come downstairs. She then started hearing regular scratching and tapping sounds in the walls and ceilings, as if someone was crawling around inside them. Then in November, Reverend Digby was writing in his study when he heard a loud knock at the door. He went to investigate, but when he opened the door, there was no one there. Then he started noticing regular scratching sounds during the day and night. Sometimes the scratching would stop just before he reached the spot where the noise was coming from, and he could hear people walking away up the stairs. At other times, he would hear chains dragging metal moans and the distinct sound of footsteps, close to his bed as if someone or something was trying to climb in and strangle him. He then began experiencing other unexplained events, such as shaking beds, shaking pictures off the wall, and even seeing the specter of an emaciated old man dragging himself closer and closer with each passing day. Another time, he was awoken in the middle of the night by a blood-curdling scream, and he could have sworn that the whole house shook. In 1873, the Reverend and his wife left the rectory for a holiday. But even while they were gone, strange things continued to happen. They received a letter from their young daughter, who was staying in the home with a governess, saying that the scratching noises had returned. The family never did return to the rectory, and it remained empty until 1894, when the Reverend and Mrs. Henry Bull moved in. The couple had only been in the home a few weeks, when they also started experiencing weird happenings. One afternoon, they were sitting in the drawing room when they heard chains dragging metal moans. As the noise drew closer, they could hear heavy footsteps directly over their heads. Then, out of nowhere, the floorboards beneath them suddenly collapsed and they tumbled down into a basement that had not been there before. They climbed back out of the hole through a trap door and filled it back in. But a few days later, the same thing happened again. And once again, they fell through the floor into the basement. It turned out that the trapdoor in the drawing room had become dislodged and had fallen into the basement, leaving a gaping hole that neither the Bulls nor any of the tenants after them would ever forget. Not long after this, new tenants moved into the rectory. A woman named Violet Paget moved in with her son Lionel and her 2 daughters, Winifred and Doris. Violet was desperate to make the rectory her home, and so she ignored all the warnings from locals about the place being haunted and raised her kids there anyway. One evening, her daughter Winifred was playing the piano when the floorboards beneath her collapsed, and she fell into the basement. Miraculously, she survived the fall and was rescued by her mother. The following day, Violet called in an architect to have the floor fixed, and sure enough, as the men were doing their work, one of them pulled up a floorboard and disappeared straight through it. The men fled in terror and never came back. That same day, Violet was in her bedroom when she saw the apparition of an emaciated old man standing at the foot of her bed. She screamed, and he vanished. That night, her son Lionel was awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of screams and chains dragging metal moans. He got out of bed to investigate and saw his mother's bedroom door open slowly by itself. He walked towards the door, which was moving faster now, and when he reached it, could see his mother's bed shaking violently. At first he thought that perhaps she was having a fit or something, but then he realized that the shaking was coming from the foot of the bed where her dog was lying. As he watched in disbelief, the dog began scratching and snarling like mad, and then it jumped off the bed and ran from the room. Then just as suddenly as it started, the shaking stopped. In the morning, Violet found her dog dead in the garden. And though she didn't know it at the time, that would not be the last animal to die in the house. Over the years, several dogs and cats belonging to the tenants died mysteriously at the rectory, as well as a horse that was stabled nearby. In 1919, after the end of World War I, Harry Price moved into the rectory with his wife and 3 children. Price was an insurance broker, but also a paranormal investigator and author. During his time in the house, He kept a detailed journal of all the strange occurrences he experienced. On May 11, 1919, he wrote that he and his wife were woken up at 4 a.m. by the sound of screams and chains dragging metal moans. They were coming from the room of their eldest daughter, who was staying in the room that had once belonged to the Digby family's son. Price went to check on his daughter and found her fast asleep. For a moment, he could hear scratching sounds coming from the room, but then everything went quiet. He returned to his own bed, but could not get back to sleep because he kept hearing the sound of someone dragging themselves closer and closer to his own bed. Then, as he was listening intently, he could swear that the bed was shaking. He grabbed his gun and held it over the bed, ready to shoot whatever was causing the commotion. But nothing happened. On another occasion, Price was awakened by the sound of a woman crying in the next room. When he investigated, he could feel the temperature drop drastically and experience what he described as an oppressive atmosphere. Suddenly, he felt a cold hand grip his shoulder, and he could smell the stench of stale decay. He screamed, and the touch vanished. He and his wife then decided to sleep with their two youngest children in the room with them, and the attacks stopped. However, one night while sleeping in the same room, Price was awoken by the sound of his young son screaming. He rushed over to the boy and shook him awake. To his horror, he found that his son's face was covered in scratches. Price immediately called a doctor, but he could find nothing wrong with the child. Price kept a close eye on his son over the following days, but no more injuries appeared and the doctor visits revealed nothing. The rest of the Price's tenancy was plagued by regular shaking beds, regular scratching sounds, and the constant feeling that they were being watched. After suffering enough, they packed up and left the rectory forever. In 1929, Harry Price published a book detailing all of the strange goings-on at the rectory, titled The Most Haunted House in England. This garnered the attention of a famous paranormal investigator named Eric J. Cannell. Along with a team of researchers, visited the rectory to conduct their own investigation. They set up camp in the house with the intention of staying for 3 days, but after only one night they packed up and left. According to Cannell, the presence in the house was evil, wicked, horrible, insane, and he feared for the safety of his team. After Cannell left, the paranormal investigators who followed him experienced similar activity to those before them, including shaking beds, shaking pictures off the wall, and even witnessing the ghost of the emaciated old man dragging himself closer and closer to them. Today, the house still stands. And though no one seems to be brave enough to stay in it long enough to witness paranormal activity firsthand, the activity has not stopped. In fact, there have been frequent reports of strange happenings at the rectory, which led readers of Reader's Digest magazine to vote it as the most haunted house in England. So what do you think? Is Borley Rectory the most haunted house in England? Or maybe even the world? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.